It was one of those days when everything seemed to be going fine until suddenly, without warning, your entire world gets flipped upside down. I had just pulled into my driveway after a long, exhausting day at work. The sun was starting to set, casting an orange glow over my quiet street. I could already hear the sound of my kids laughing in the backyard as I got out of the car. But when I turned around, my stomach dropped. There it was, right in front of my driveway. Karen's car, parked smack in the middle of the only way I could get into my house. It wasn't just a little off to the side. It was blocking my driveway, completely. At first, I thought, maybe it's an accident. Maybe she didn't mean to park here. But as I looked closer, I saw the same scene that had been playing out all week. Karen was parked there deliberately. This wasn't the first time she had done it, but today was the last straw. I had enough. The frustrating part? Karen lived 2 doors down. We had been neighbors for years, and up until now, I had always thought we had a good relationship. Sure, she could be a little annoying at times, but nothing that couldn't be dealt with. But this? This was crossing a line. I had a family to take care of, and every time she blocked my driveway, it meant I had to find another way to get in, wasting precious time. There was no way I was going to let this continue. I stood there, staring at her car, my fists clenching. What should I do? Should I call her and ask her to move? Or should I go knock on her door, confront her, and try to get this sorted out face to face? I decided to go with the second option. After all, we were neighbors, and neighbors should be able to talk things out, right? I walked to her house with a mix of frustration and confusion. I had no idea why she was doing this, but I was determined to get answers. As I knocked on her door, my mind raced. What if she was just having a bad day? Maybe she didn't realize how much of an inconvenience it was for me. I hoped this was all just a misunderstanding. When Karen finally opened the door, she looked at me like I had just interrupted her favorite TV show. She didn't even greet me, just stood there with a raised eyebrow. "Karen, can we talk for a second?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's up?" she replied, her tone sharp. "Listen, you've been parking in front of my driveway all week. It's becoming a real issue for me. I can't get in or out when you're blocking me like that. Could you please park somewhere else?" I asked, hoping for a simple, reasonable answer. Her face instantly twisted into a defensive scowl. "Oh, come on. You're acting like it's such a big deal. It's just for a few minutes." "I'm not hurting anyone," she said, dismissing me as if my request was unimportant. I was taken aback. "It's not just for a few minutes, Karen. It's every day now. And it's not just an inconvenience, it's rude. I'm trying to run a household here. I have places to go, and I need to get in and out of my driveway. Can you please just park in front of your own house?" But she didn't seem to care. She didn't even apologize. Instead, she turned her back on me and closed the door with a dismissive, "Whatever." I stood there, stunned, wondering how things had gotten so bad. Had she really changed that much? Had she really become that inconsiderate? I turned around, my blood boiling. As I walked back to my house, I thought about how to handle this. I could have let it slide, but this wasn't just some small problem, it was starting to affect my day-to-day life. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. She had no right to treat me this way, and I wasn't going to let it go. That night, after dinner, I sat down and wrote a note. I wasn't going to confront her again in person, but I wanted her to know how serious I was. I told her how her parking was affecting my family and how I expected her to stop. I left it on her doorstep and hoped it would work. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. The next morning, I walked out of my house, coffee in hand, only to see the same thing again. Karen's car was blocking my driveway. This time, there was no note, no apology, just her car parked there like it was her spot. I tried to stay calm. I took a deep breath and went inside to grab my phone. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her get away with this anymore. I dialed the non-emergency line and explained the situation to the operator. They told me it wasn't a big deal, but they would send someone over to check. They weren't sure how much help they could be, but it was a start. When the officer arrived, I was ready. I explained the situation again, and thankfully, he took me seriously. He went to talk to Karen and asked her to move her car. I stood there, waiting, hoping this would finally resolve things. But as I watched the officer talk to her, I could see her shaking her head. She wasn't going to give in that easily. The officer came back to me, shaking his head. "She's not willing to move the car," he said. "I don't know what else we can do right now." I couldn't believe it. How could she be so stubborn? What was going through her mind? I had already tried being reasonable. I had tried talking to her, and I had tried writing her a note. But nothing was getting through. That's when I decided to take things further. I knew I had to do something that would make Karen realize that this wasn't just a minor inconvenience for me, it was a serious issue. I couldn't let her continue treating me like I was overreacting. After all, it wasn't just about my driveway, it was about respect. I couldn't allow her to keep walking all over me, especially when I had done everything in my power to be polite and understanding. The next step was clear. I needed to get her attention, and I needed to do it in a way that would make her realize how serious the situation had become. I decided to call a tow truck. It felt like the only way to send the message: you can't keep doing this, and there are consequences if you do. I wasn't happy about calling a tow truck, but I had no choice. I grabbed my phone, found the number for the local towing company, and explained the situation. The operator seemed sympathetic and assured me that they would send someone over as soon as possible. I knew Karen would be furious, but at that point, I didn't care. She had pushed me to this point. She had ignored my polite requests, refused to listen, and shown no regard for my needs. If this was the only way to stop her, then so be it. It didn't take long for the tow truck to arrive. The driver backed up into my driveway, and as soon as the truck's engine roared to life, I saw Karen's face through the window of her house. She must have heard the noise because she stormed outside, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you think you're doing?" she shouted as she ran toward the tow truck. I stood there, calmly watching her approach. "I'm having your car towed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her face turned bright red. "You can't do that. This is my spot. I've been parking here for years," she yelled, hands flailing in the air. "I've told you repeatedly to stop blocking my driveway, and you've ignored me every time. You had your chance to fix this, but you chose not to. Now, you'll learn that there are consequences for your actions," I replied. She was fuming now, pacing back and forth like a wild animal caught in a cage. "You're insane. You'll regret this. I'm calling the cops," she screamed. I wasn't worried. I knew I was in the right. The officer had already been to my house, and he had agreed that Karen was in the wrong. I didn't need to explain myself again. The tow truck driver calmly attached the chain to Karen's car, and with a loud crunch, he began to pull it away. Karen was livid. She started running after the truck, shouting at the driver to stop, her hands pressed against her forehead as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Stop. Stop right now," she screamed. I just stood there, watching. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment Karen realized I wasn't playing games anymore. She had pushed me too far, and now she was about to pay the price for her stubbornness. Finally, after a few minutes of dramatic back and forth, the tow truck driver drove away with her car, leaving her standing in the middle of the street, hands on her hips, breathing heavily. She looked defeated. I turned to go inside, feeling a sense of relief. I had stood my ground, and I had taken action. As I walked up to my front door, I could hear Karen muttering angrily to herself, but I wasn't about to let her get to me. She had gotten away with too much for too long, and now the tables had turned. She had learned a valuable lesson, and it was one she wouldn't forget any time soon. But as the day went on, I began to feel a little guilty. Maybe I had gone too far. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. All I had wanted was for Karen to be a little more respectful. But I had done what I felt was necessary to take control of the situation. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Karen. I was hesitant to answer, but I did. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she yelled as soon as I picked up. "You think you can just have my car towed? What kind of person does that? I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did." I let her finish, then calmly said, "Karen, I tried to be polite. I asked you nicely to stop blocking my driveway. But you didn't listen. You left me no choice." Her voice softened slightly, but it was still full of anger. "You could have just talked to me again, or called a tow truck, but you didn't need to go that far." "I gave you chances," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "You chose to ignore them. Now you're dealing with the consequences. You can't just do whatever you want without any regard for others. That's not how the world works." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she had hung up, but then she spoke again, much quieter this time. "I guess I understand. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't realize how much of an issue it was for you. I'll park somewhere else from now on." I could hardly believe my ears. Karen, apologizing? After everything that had happened? It felt like the world had shifted. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. "You're not forgiven yet," I said firmly, but not unkindly. "You need to understand that actions have consequences. I'm glad you're finally listening, but it shouldn't have taken this long for you to get it." The line went quiet again, and I thought for a second that maybe Karen was going to snap again. But she didn't. Instead, she just sighed and said, "You're right. I'll park properly from now on. I don't want to cause any more trouble." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. The situation had finally been resolved, but it wasn't exactly the way I had imagined it would go. However, sometimes that's how life works. It's messy, unexpected, and a bit crazy. But in the end, I had gotten my point across, and that's all I wanted. A couple of days passed, and I started to feel like things were finally getting back to normal. Karen kept to her word. Her car was no longer blocking my driveway, and the tension between us seemed to have settled down. It was like the storm had passed, and now everything was calm again. But that's when I got a surprise. It was a Saturday morning, and I had just finished mowing the lawn. I was sitting on my front steps, enjoying the sunshine and a cold drink when I saw her walking towards me. Karen. She was holding a small envelope in her hand, and her face looked different. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't friendly either. It was more like she was unsure of how to approach me. When she reached my steps, she hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. I was surprised but nodded. "Sure, what's up?" Karen handed me the envelope and sighed. "I owe you an apology. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize I was wrong. I should have never parked in front of your driveway like that, and I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I let my frustration get the better of me." I took the envelope from her, still trying to process what she was saying. "I didn't expect you to come here and apologize," I said. "But, thank you. It means a lot." She shifted uncomfortably. "I know it doesn't undo everything, but I wanted to make it right. Inside the envelope, there's a little something. Well, I guess it's a gesture to show that I'm serious about making amends." I opened the envelope, and inside was a small check. My first instinct was to laugh because it seemed so out of place. But as I looked at the amount, I realized what it was for. It was to cover the cost of the tow truck. The very tow truck that had taken her car away. I was taken aback. I never expected anything like this. "Karen, you didn't have to do this," I said, holding the check in my hand. "I wasn't looking for any kind of compensation." She nodded. "I know, but it's the least I can do. I realize now that I was being selfish, and I want to make it right. I've learned my lesson, and I won't be parking in front of your driveway again. I'm sorry for everything." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected Karen to come to me like this, and I certainly hadn't expected her to be this humble. Maybe it was the reality of what happened finally sinking in. Maybe it was the embarrassment of getting her car towed. Whatever it was, it seemed like Karen had finally understood that actions have consequences. I looked at the check for a moment longer and then handed it back to her. "Keep it," I said. "You don't need to pay me back for that. Just keep parking in your spot, and we'll call it even." Karen blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I said with a smile. "We're neighbors. No need to make this more complicated than it is." She stood there for a second, staring at me. Then, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're right. I won't mess this up again." I watched as Karen turned and walked back to her house, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It had taken a lot for both of us to get here. What started as a simple issue with her blocking my driveway had turned into something much bigger, but in the end, we had both learned valuable lessons. I had learned that sometimes you need to stand your ground, even if it's uncomfortable. And Karen? Well, it seemed like she had learned that her actions affected others, and that respect goes both ways. As I sat back down on my steps, I couldn't help but feel a little proud. Proud of myself for handling the situation without escalating things too much, and proud of Karen for finally doing the right thing. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't an easy process, but it was done. In the weeks that followed, Karen never parked in front of my driveway again. Our relationship as neighbors didn't go back to the way it had been, but it was better than it had been before. We both knew the boundaries now, and that made living next door to each other a lot easier. I'd like to say that things stayed peaceful forever, but that's just not how life works. There were still occasional moments of tension, but nothing like before. The most important thing was that I had learned to stand up for myself when needed, and that sometimes, taking a firm stance is the best way to ensure respect. As for Karen? She still waved at me when we crossed paths, but there was always a little more distance between us now, both literally and figuratively. And that was just fine with me. Months went by, and life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. I had almost forgotten about the whole incident. Karen kept her word, and I didn't have to worry about her blocking my driveway again. I even started to notice her being more considerate in general. She'd wave from her driveway, and when she saw me, she'd give me a polite nod or a smile. Things were quiet, and I was happy about that. The last thing I wanted was to continue living in some kind of awkward tension with her. Then, one day, while I was out doing yard work, I saw Karen walking toward me with a nervous expression on her face. This was the first time I'd seen her since the apology, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was here for now. My first instinct was to brace myself. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what she might do next. But as she got closer, I could see she wasn't angry or upset. In fact, she looked almost embarrassed. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, hesitating a little. I wiped my hands on my pants and looked up at her. "Sure, what's up?" She shuffled her feet, looking down at the ground. "I just wanted to thank you again for the other day. I know it's been a while, but I really do appreciate you being understanding and letting me off the hook with the tow truck thing." I nodded. "It's no problem. Like I said before, I wasn't looking for anything from you. Just wanted to make sure things were good between us." She looked up at me, her face softer than I was used to seeing. "I know. But you didn't have to do that. And I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been really rude to you in the past, and it wasn't just about the driveway. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been difficult with a lot of people. I guess I've had a hard time accepting that people have their own lives and boundaries, and I've been acting entitled. And I feel like I need to change." I was stunned. Karen, my difficult neighbor who had made my life a little harder not too long ago, was actually admitting that she had a problem? And, more surprisingly, she was taking responsibility for it? I didn't know what to say at first, so I just nodded, unsure if she was just trying to make herself feel better or if this was for real. "I'm not asking for you to forgive me again," she continued, "but I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm going to therapy to work through my issues, and I'm trying to be better, both for myself and for the people around me." I took a moment to process her words. Therapy? That was a big deal. It wasn't easy to admit you needed help, especially if you were someone who thought you had everything under control. But Karen was telling me that she was making an effort to change. For the first time, I actually believed her. "Well, I'm glad to hear that," I said, trying to keep my response neutral. "It's good that you're taking responsibility for your actions. I think that's all anyone can really ask for." She smiled slightly, still looking a bit embarrassed. "I've been a jerk to a lot of people in the neighborhood, and I really want to make things right. I hope that maybe one day, we can be friends again. I know it'll take time, but I just want to try." I felt a little bit of warmth in my chest. This was unexpected. I had never imagined that Karen, of all people, would want to rebuild some kind of relationship with me. But she was trying, and that was enough. It was a big step. "Of course," I said, still not entirely sure how to react. "I don't expect us to be best friends or anything, but I appreciate you being honest about everything. It's a step in the right direction." She nodded, looking relieved. "Thanks for listening. I'll leave you to your work now. And, I'll make sure to stay in my lane from now on." I watched her walk back to her house, and as I turned to get back to my lawnmower, I couldn't help but feel like the air had shifted. Things were different now, not just between Karen and me, but for her too. For the first time, she seemed truly aware of her behavior and was doing something about it. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. Over the next few months, Karen's behavior seemed to improve. She still kept to herself mostly, but when we crossed paths, she'd wave and ask how my family was doing. There were no more incidents, no more tension. And though I wasn't about to forget everything that had happened, I found myself feeling a little more at ease with her. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. The situation with the driveway had started as something small and irritating, but it had grown into a story about personal growth, change, and learning how to respect others. It was a story that didn't just end with a car being towed, it ended with two neighbors learning how to coexist, even if it took a little longer than expected. Now, when I think back on it, I'm grateful for that time. It reminded me that people can change, and sometimes, it's never too late to make things right. Even with Karen. A year had passed since the incident with Karen and the driveway, and life had definitely settled into a much more peaceful routine. I had put that whole situation behind me, mostly, and I had seen a noticeable shift in Karen's behavior. While we weren't best friends or anything, there was a new sense of civility between us. She was quieter, more respectful, and the awkwardness that had once hovered around our interactions had faded. I was relieved, and I hoped we had truly moved on from that strange chapter. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my living room, enjoying a rare moment of quiet, my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of my neighbors, a friend I had known for years. The message was simple, yet it gave me pause. It read, "Hey, Karen's having a party this Saturday. She wants to invite you. Thought I'd let you know." At first, I wasn't sure what to think. Karen? Throwing a party? And inviting me? I could hardly believe it. We had certainly never been close enough for that kind of gesture, and while I had seen her making strides in being a better neighbor, inviting me to a social gathering felt like a huge leap. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions too quickly. Maybe this was a sign that Karen was serious about turning things around, that she wanted to make amends in a bigger way. After all, it could be a gesture of goodwill, one where she was trying to prove that she truly had changed. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to send her a text back. I kept it simple: "Thanks for the invite, Karen. I'll think about it and let you know." It was a polite response, not fully committing to anything but acknowledging the gesture. I spent the next few days thinking about it. My mind kept going back to everything that had happened, to how things had started between us. I thought about the blocked driveway, the tow truck incident, the apology, and the changes I had seen in her. There was no denying that she had made an effort. Still, I wasn't sure if I was ready to move past everything, or if this party was just a way for her to wipe the slate clean. Saturday arrived, and the day seemed to drag on. I kept thinking about the party, wondering if I should just go for the sake of being friendly or if I was setting myself up for disappointment. I had no idea what to expect from Karen or her guests. Would it be awkward? Would she even acknowledge the past? Or would we just pretend everything was fine? By late afternoon, I had made up my mind. I had decided to go. I wasn't expecting any major revelations, but I felt like it might be a good opportunity to see if Karen's change was real. If nothing else, I figured it would give me some closure on the entire situation. When I arrived at Karen's house, it felt like a completely different world. Her place was buzzing with energy, laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. It was nothing like the Karen I had known, the one who had always been a little too self-absorbed. Now, she seemed almost normal. I was taken aback by how comfortable everything felt. People were mingling in the yard, chatting, laughing, and there was an overall sense of lightness that I hadn't expected. Karen saw me as soon as I walked in and immediately waved me over. "Hey! I'm so glad you could make it," she said, a genuine smile on her face. "It means a lot that you came." I smiled back, trying to mask my surprise. "Thanks for inviting me. This is nice." She nodded, clearly happy that I had shown up. "I've been trying to change, you know. I really wanted to show you that I'm serious about being a better neighbor. And it wouldn't feel right to have a party without you here. You're part of the neighborhood, and I want to make sure we all get along." I didn't know what to say to that. Here was the same Karen, but this time she seemed humble. She didn't have that air of entitlement I was so used to seeing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or act like she was in charge. It felt different. I walked around the party, meeting a few new faces and talking to people I hadn't really spoken to before. The vibe was relaxed and friendly, and slowly, I started to let go of some of the lingering tension. Everyone seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. Karen's guests didn't seem to be bothered by any history between us, and it became easier to just enjoy the evening. At one point, Karen pulled me aside to chat for a few minutes. We found a quiet corner near the garden, and she seemed almost nervous, which was a far cry from the Karen I had known before. "I know this might seem like a lot," she began, "but I wanted to thank you again for giving me the chance to make things right. I know I messed up, and I want to keep improving. You didn't have to come, but you did, and that means a lot to me. I know I've got a lot of work to do, but I hope I'm on the right track." I could see the sincerity in her eyes. This wasn't just some attempt to smooth things over, this was a real conversation, one where she was acknowledging her past mistakes and her efforts to make amends. It was clear that she wanted to do more than just apologize for her actions, she wanted to change, and she was working on it every day. "I can see that," I said, trying to put her at ease. "And honestly, I'm glad we're getting along better now. It wasn't always easy, but I appreciate that you're making the effort." She gave a small, relieved laugh. "It hasn't been easy for me either. But I'm willing to do the work. Thanks for being patient with me." The party continued well into the night, and as I left, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of hope. I didn't know if Karen's transformation was permanent, but for the first time in a long while, I truly believed she was trying. That, in itself, was a victory. Maybe, just maybe, the crazy neighbor who once blocked my driveway had finally become a person I could live next to without resentment. In the end, the party wasn't just about Karen's apology, it was about a new beginning. For her, for me, and for our relationship as neighbors. It was proof that people could change, that reconciliation was possible, and that sometimes, all it took was a little effort and understanding. And as I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel like we had both come a long way from that driveway confrontation. It was a strange, unexpected journey, but it had taught me something important. Change, no matter how slow or difficult, was always possible.